Welcome to State of Politics. I'm David Zhang. Thank you so much for joining us today. Let's talk about Elon Musk, the world's richest man. He's been in the spotlight a lot lately for his comments on sensitive issues. Now, the controversy over his 4-point peace proposal on the Russian-Ukrainian war a few days ago has yet to pass. And now he has once again stirred up a huge controversy for his views on the Taiwan Strait. The Financial Times published an interview with Elon Musk by editor Raula Khalaf. In the interview, when she talked about the current sensitive situation in the Taiwan Strait, Elon Musk expressed his opinion to the effect that he thinks the conflict between the two sides of the Taiwan Strait, Taiwan and China, is inevitable, and not only his Tesla, which has a factory in Shanghai, will be unlucky by association, Apple will actually be in deeper trouble. And the global economy will inevitably be hard hit, and his personal judgment is that the global economy will take a 30% hit. Apple, of course, gets its silicon chips from Taiwan's chip maker TSMC for phones and laptop processors. And the sensitivity of Taiwan stems from the Chinese Communist Party in the mainland wanting to potentially take over Taiwan by military force. According to the Pentagon and many experts on this matter, they think and estimate that it could be as early as 2027. Now, according to the Chinese Communist Party, the so-called, quote, reunification of Taiwan is a historic mission for the party and one that President Xi Jinping wants to complete during his time. Now, then the article says that perhaps Elon Musk is beginning to realize that business decisions can no longer be made without taking security and political considerations into account. So he offers his own solution to the world's most complex geopolitical problem, the Taiwan Strait. In his words, quote, my recommendation would be to figure out a special administrative zone for Taiwan that is reasonably palatable, but probably won't make everyone happy. And it's possible, and I think probably in fact, that they could have an arrangement that's more lenient than Hong Kong. And then Khalaf, who wrote the piece, wrote this: I doubt his proposal will be taken up. I agree. Now, in my view, it is highly unlikely that Musk's proposal will be adopted by both sides in Taiwan and China. And here's why. As soon as the report came out, many of Taiwan's netizens disagreed with the take, with many leaving comments saying that this is too far-fetched. And many argued that the main reason why Musk always makes suggestions that China and Russia like to hear is that his Tesla German factory is being choked by energy from Russia, and the Chinese Communist Party is choking the factory in Shanghai, specifically Tesla's Gigafactory in Shanghai, which produces close to 50% of the vehicles that Tesla currently sells around the world. To my surprise, even some in the mainland China internet space, they also acknowledged what Elon Musk had said, which is that though they agree, but they also stress that Taiwan is a sovereignty issue for China and a domestic one, and no one is allowed to take Taiwan for granted. So we can see that Musk's Taiwan Strait peace proposal is almost the same fate as his Russia-Ukraine peace proposal. Both are considered to show weakness and concession to the dictatorship, but not actually accepted by the dictatorship in itself, which is a bit unpleasant at both ends. In fact, the US has a long-standing policy called the One China policy, and that basically says the United States recognizes only one China. But as vague as that sounds, it is about preserving the status quo across the Taiwan Strait, keeping things the way they are right now. What we're seeing in recent years is actually that the Chinese Communist Party is the one trying to cross the line between peace and stability and what they're calling their own One China principle and the United States version of One China policy. And they're trying to use, essentially actively trying to change the status quo, trying to rewrite the definition by suggesting that Taiwan must be taken militarily, the only option going forward as seen by the CCP. What the US-Taiwan really want is to maintain its current presence and state of how the country is, while China is eyeing to take Taiwan by the end of the decade. In other words, it is precisely as Putin had done to cross the line into Ukraine, as the CCP wants to do in Taiwan, that the aggressor had broken a promise. Now, this is a big misconception here. And of course, it's not actually the Taiwanese people or the American government that wants to change things. It is the CCP that's doing it. But it's much bigger than that for the CCP. Taiwan represents something that the regime fears. Now, let's say the communist ideology is built on ruling by power, violence, and fear, and an island the size of Maryland, holding a complete opposite ideology as the CCP, seems to be a nightmare for the regime. Now, a thriving democracy that is closely aligned with the West, which the Chinese regime has long held as the enemy of the CCP, that in itself is already scary to the regime's stability. In other words, Taiwan stands as the shining example of what China could be and should be, and how the Chinese people should be living but are not. So the CCP must stamp out Taiwan in terms of storing or restoring the order in their context and their definition, which is that China should only be governed and lived by the communist rules and should not live by any democratic rules. Now, there's actually a context to Musk's proposal, in that he previously told Caliph in the interview that the Chinese Communist Party had made clear its disapproval of his recent launch of SpaceX Starlink system in Ukraine to help the Ukrainian military bypass Russia's internet cutoff. And he said that Beijing sought assurances that he would not sell Starlink in mainland China should something like this in Ukraine happen in China or Taiwan. Now, in case you didn't get updated on the Ukraine side, earlier this week, Elon Musk had proposed a 4-point take on how to peacefully end the war in Ukraine. Now, these include redoing elections of annexed regions under UN supervision, and Russia will leave if that is the will of the people. Crimea would formally become a part of Russia, as it has been since 1783 until Khrushchev's mistake, and water supply to Crimea assured, and also Ukraine would remain neutral. Now, of course, from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to his cabinet and Ukrainian leadership overall, to even the average Joe on Twitter, they've suddenly exploded because, perhaps shocked too, that Elon would offer a clear concession to make peace. Of course, Elon Musk further elaborated, saying that, quote, also worth noting that a possible, albeit unlikely, the outcome from this conflict is nuclear war. President Zelensky even offered his tweet of his own, which suggests that, says, which Elon Musk do you like more? And that's a survey, and seems more people have polled to like the Elon Musk who supported Ukraine. Of course, we know that Ukraine will not surrender its territories to Russia. It even likely bombed the Crimea bridge, and seems that's a whole other topic, but to lose Crimea and still remain neutral as part of keeping the peace, all the while that they're already pushing back on Russia, is not something that the Ukrainian leadership or its people would want at the current stage. When it comes to Taiwan, it is the same thing. Even though we know that Starlink, which Elon Musk launched to help Ukraine in a high-tech based warfare to give the Ukrainians a fighting edge, the Chinese Communist Party sees it in their eyes that Starlink is something that threatens the legitimacy of the regime, but also at the same time would hinder the CCP's invasion of Taiwan. Clearly, the Chinese Communist Party is using Musk's factory in Shanghai, its high output of Tesla vehicles, to leverage him. And if Musk helps Taiwan during the communist invasion of Taiwan, or if he opens Starlink operations in the mainland, well then his factory in Shanghai could already accounts for 30 to 50% of Tesla's global production, could be taken by the regime. But the question is, will the CCP use a single gigafactory to strangle Elon Musk and enable Musk to obediently do the CCP's bidding in the event of a war in the Taiwan Strait? I think it is difficult to determine, but the CCP threat is real, and we will not have any doubt that it is possible for something to happen. First of all, I think there are two key points in Musk's Taiwan Strait peace proposal. The first is that he explicitly wants to solve the problem in the Hong Kong-like model of special administrative regions. That is, he does not support Taiwan's independence, which is actually very close to the official one country, two systems model that the CCP is using, which does not recognize the retention of the Republic of China state name that Taiwan uses. And the second point is that he believes that the special administrative region model should be reasonable enough to be acceptable, which is very unclear and vague in concept, but we also don't really know is how do you determine the negotiation process so that every party involved would feel like they're satisfied. In real life, that's impossible. Keep in mind, Taiwan is not just an interest to just China, but also to Japan, the United States, and many other countries that have technological interest and geopolitical interest in Asia and in Taiwan. And that's much more than Ukraine. So let's not forget what happened in Hong Kong. despite Beijing promises that Hong Kong would remain free for 50 years after it was returned to China from the United Kingdom. And remember, in 2019, a draconian national security law was passed, and it essentially destroyed any rule of law in Hong Kong and subsequently turned the city into one of its communist properties. And democracy was no longer available as an option in Hong Kong anymore. And it was at that time it hadn't even reached the halfway mark of the 50 years before the CCP attempted to take back Hong Kong. If China can't stand Hong Kong as it is, a special administrative state where it was a former British colony with a democratic government, how could they stand letting Taiwan be anything but a part of China? A special administrative region just won't work for people who especially have already seen what freedom and democracy could do for them. Wanting them to go back to a state like China, chances are they won't say yes. And this is to say that any promise from the Chinese Communist Party should not be taken seriously because they could say one thing and just do another behind their back. Earlier, I talked about how technology and the form of government, aka communism versus democracy, is central to the legitimacy of the regime in Beijing. Well, Hong Kong, which was ruled by a democratic government, could not stand to last 50 years without interference from the Chinese Communist Party. How can we guarantee that Taiwan, should it become a special administrative region of China, wouldn't attempt to be, maybe in 20 or 10 years, or even 5 years, attempt to be the same level of draconian laws could be passed in Taiwan that would force the island to become a part of China, right? In other words, the credibility of the CCP to keep their words, not that good. And the so-called concession to China is really only temporary. When former Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping announced his version of the one country, two systems back in the days, and that allowed Taiwan to retain its military and agreed that not to send officials from the mainland to serve in Taiwan, this version was actually once considered more reasonable back in the days. But that was not accepted even by the Taiwanese people then. Now, the current leader Xi Jinping, who is the Chinese General Secretary of the Communist Party, took away the right for them to even have a military during the latest National Congress. And so, not to blame Elon Musk, but I think there's been a huge misunderstanding of the historical priority or the importance of Taiwan to the Chinese regime, and that priority surpasses common political needs. It is ideological. If the CCP doesn't take Taiwan, they have not completed a promise that started in 1949, which was when the CCP took over China, and that they leave a vibrant democracy a huge contrast and a reflection of what China could be, and that is scary to the communist regime. Now, we can see that this is very similar to his peace proposals for the Russo-Ukrainian war, which seems reasonable and are based on trying to avoid mass destruction and the danger of nuclear war. But these proposals are somewhat divorced from reality. Here's why. Musk's proposal is the opposite of what, when it comes to Taiwan, of the former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's public call for the US government to recognize the sovereignty of the Republic of China, which is Taiwan. Now, Pompeo's call is based on his consideration of historical sources and objective reality, coupled with his thorough understanding of the nature of the Chinese Communist Party, which is precisely what Musk lacks the most. The Chinese Communist Party is too cunning. In the face of all kinds of fraudulent techniques crafted by the party with nearly a century of experience, I'm afraid that there are really not many people who can see through it at a glance and have a clear mind on what exactly they're doing. We all know that the American society is a society ruled by elite politics, and it took over 40 years for such a society to really start to wake up and see what the CCP is all about. Really, before Trump became president, the US had a friendly policy toward China, and the common understanding of the US-China policy and relationship was that two great powers should be working together and be friends to achieve peace. Yet behind the so-called friendship was a dagger ready to stab our backs. Since the normalization in the 1970s, China and the United States have repeatedly worked together, with really one side helping out the other, much more than the reciprocal. The United States helped China to strengthen its own national power, and then helped it to create the world's biggest military. It has used the US's help to join the World Trade Organization, and to this day, still fails to abide by those free market policies that they promised in the first place. It has long achieved economic growth by stealing the United States and other countries' key technology, committing malign trade practices, and lying to the world that it would become a democracy. And it didn't happen until 2020, when the virus hit the world, that people realized China is lying to us. All the while in China telling people that their economic growth has come at the context of stable communist rule, suggesting that democracy and growth are not inevitably mutually dependent. And in fact, many Chinese believe that the country's recent economic achievements, large-scale poverty reduction, huge infrastructure investment, and development as a world-class tech hub, well, actually came at the cost of China's authoritarian efforts and not because, well, the West helped them. What the government doesn't tell its citizens is the fact that the United States and other nations helped China along the way to make it what it is today. And in doing so, it's able to keep its own communist rules intact, stable, all the while attacking the West form of democracy as something with flaws and incomplete. Little do they note that all of this was actually built on the ground that China got a lot of help from the West. But this is all because China has the ambition to dominate the world. The United States is standing in the way of that. And Taiwan is also a key for the CCP to unlock Asia. What do I mean by that? Well, for example, Taiwan as the TSMC semiconductor manufacturer, which supplies companies like Apple with silicon chips. That's crucial for our lives. It also has strategic significance given the position of Taiwan as a part of the first island chain. And that's a chain designed as almost like a barrier to prevent China from accessing the Pacific Ocean with its navy, which is increasingly becoming a blue water navy, which means that they have the ability to command the high seas and to generate naval superiority. Plus, if Taiwan falls to the Communist Party, it can signify to countries nearby, like Japan and South Korea, or perhaps even the Philippines and Australia, that China has the ability to dominate Asia, and the United States is no longer the sole superpower and a Pacific power, which could control trading routes like the South China Sea and among others. And that means the US will lose its position as the #1 global power, and communism will thrive and dominate around the world. Elon Musk himself says that he is a promoter of free speech, and no matter how many peace proposals he puts forward, he's just inputting one idea. Now, he's essentially the same as us. In some areas, he's of an expert, and in other areas, he's an authority. But in some other areas, he's just a common man like us. But at the end of the day, seeking peace and understanding the ideologies of communism, especially when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party, is crucial in maybe perhaps coming up with a plan that would work. Thank you so much for watching today. This is State of Politics. I'm David Zhang. And if you enjoy the content, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Tell us what you think or maybe what we should cover next. Also, make sure you turn on your notification bell so you never miss the latest episodes. I'm David Zhang. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.